you, Sonia. As Pip just said, my main claim to fame is that I'm married to her. I'm also church warden and help lead the Praise monthly group. So those of you that don't know, every August for the past decade or so, we've done a series of talks on the Psalms. Mainly because Cameron goes off to Scotland for his Scottish break to recharge, and we're left to pick a psalm which he thinks he can trust people like me with. And in all those psalms that have been picked, I don't think anyone's ever picked the most famous psalm of all, which is Psalm 23, I think we'd agree. And I'm not sure why, although possibly it's because it's so associated with funerals and with death in lots of people's minds. So why did I choose it now? Because I knew I should speak on Psalm 23. As soon as Cameron said, will you speak in August? I knew it should be Psalm 23, but actually I didn't know why. And that's actually a key theme for this talk of mine today, the theme of certainty, knowing I should speak on Psalm 23, and yet doubt, not really sure why. Now, the reason I felt I should speak on it is that in the last 9 months I've lost both my parents, who both were instrumental in my faith. And 9 months ago today, I read Psalm 23 to my mother in hospital the day before she died. And then in the ward, surrounded by some crazy old ladies, as my sister put it, I sung her the Stuart Townend version, song based on Psalm 23, very quietly, much more quietly than I normally sing. I don't know if you know it. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me lie in pastures green. He leads me by the still, still waters. His goodness restores my soul. I'll play it for you later so you can enjoy it in full. But I sung that to her, and as I sung it to her, she fell asleep. It may have been the last thing she heard. So I knew for personal reasons, for selfish personal reasons, I wanted to talk on Psalm 23. Wasn't quite sure why, as I said. And actually, the Psalms are often for David in particular, not just a vehicle for praising God, but a way for him to express doubt, his questions, his struggles. And this famous psalm is none of that. It's so certain of itself, faced with the biggest things in life, and so full of faith. And instead of talking about it in the more traditional way, I actually want to go through it, not speaking on it as much as asking questions prompted by it, for you, for me, for all of us. And hopefully why I ask those questions makes a bit more sense to you all later on. So here goes. Verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd. Such a famous image, and in the Old Testament in particular, that was an image of a king, a leader, not just of a controller of sheep, and the sort of pastoral sense of Jesus looking after us like little lambs. So who or what is your ruler? Can you start your personal psalm with that statement? The Lord is my ruler. The Lord is my king. God rules my life. What stops you? Perhaps it's this: I shall not be in want. What are you lacking? What do you need? And do you talk to God about it honestly, like David did so often? I shall not be in want. Do you believe that? Verse 2, he leads me beside quiet waters. Do you look for God to lead you? Do you seek out quiet waters? Do you seek out quiet time with him? Because if you don't, will this happen? He restores my soul, verse 3. Does God really restore your soul? How does your soul feel today, after the last 18 months? Do you welcome God's work in you to restore and to renew? Do you invite him to restore and renew? He guides me in paths of righteousness. Have you lost that path? I know I do sometimes. How? How have you? What made you, or what makes you, again and again, trip up? What can you change? How can God guide you back? Verse 4, even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Really? Can any of us say that? Even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. What do you fear? For you are with me. Do you feel that God is with you here, at home, in your struggles, in your relationships, at work, or in the search for work? Why not? And when not? When do you not feel that God's with you? So many questions. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. That tangible sense of the shepherd's crook, that stick the shepherd held, protecting, guiding, counting off the sheep, numbering them, knowing them. That tangible sense of God's presence. Do you miss that tangible sense of God with you in your life, hooking you out of danger? Verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Do you even understand that image? I have to admit I didn't, particularly. I had to look it up. The image of a table being prepared before us is of God's protection as overlord, as king, as master, as all-powerful one. And the meal with him is a symbol of that provision, even as enemies lurk. A symbol almost of his power, but also his generosity. Do you know that, God? You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Do you feel the generosity of God? That cup overflowing. Do you understand his blessing on you? Do you feel anointed? Anointed with oil as a special guest of honor at his table. And we all know, we've heard even recently about David and his failings and how many ways he got things wrong. In all of his actions as king, his sinfulness in all kinds of ways. And yet he was able to say that. Verse 6. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. Do you believe that for yourself? I definitely struggle with it in that hospital ward, as my mother struggled to breathe and to talk. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Do you want that to be true for you and for those you love? So many questions. And even though I had so many different doubts and questions as both my parents died in the past 9 months, at the same time, I've genuinely known great peace. And the reason I've asked so many questions so far today is because I've become increasingly aware that asking questions and having doubts is absolutely fine. In fact, more than that, it's right. David was a man of many doubts and fears, despite being an anointed king who ruled in power and had such an amazing personal relationship with God. He still had many doubts. But at his centre, he had shalom, peace, this Jewish word for peace that involves a sense of wholeness, of being centred, of stability, knowing that God loves him and is for him. That's expressed in this psalm, isn't it? A wholeness, a sense of being loved by God, the shepherd, the provider, the protector. So despite the doubts expressed elsewhere, he expresses his faith so clearly in this psalm. So I ask question after question because that's me, that's us, isn't it? It's life, and it's also possibly our own natural reaction to someone being so certain of their faith. I know mine is often to question and to doubt when someone else is so certain. And again, I say it, I think that's fine, and it's right. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Real faith is wrestling with and engaging with your doubts, not ignoring them. The Spanish writer Miguel de Unamuno, who I had the misfortune to study as a student many years ago, actually that's not fair, he was actually a very good writer, and one of his sayings was, "Faith which does not doubt is dead faith." Faith which does not doubt is dead faith. And I think that's what I've been saying, that if you're not engaging with it and thinking through and praying about and bringing to God your doubts and your fears, then you're just swallowing something for the sake of it, and it's not yours. That was definitely true for me as a vicar's kid, that I had to make that faith mine. There's an amazing story in the New Testament, which is one of my favourite encounters of Jesus. In Mark 9, he meets the father of the very sick boy, and I think it rings true for me in all kinds of ways, but possibly because I've had the experience of having both my boys in intensive care for periods of time when they were much younger, and I prayed this prayer that the father does. I don't know if you remember, he brings his boy to the disciples and they can't heal him. And then Jesus turns up and he begs Jesus to heal his son. And Jesus says, everything is possible for him who believes. And immediately the father exclaims, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. And I just think that's such a profound statement. I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. That combination of faith and doubt. And Jesus heals his son. He doesn't tell him off. He heals his son. I love that story. I love the authenticity of the father, desperate to believe, but not sure Jesus can actually do it for him. And that's faith. So many questions, so much unbelief, but holding firm to believing in Jesus, his Saviour, who can heal. So don't worry if you can't, at the moment, or don't feel you've ever really been able to express faith in God the way David does in Psalm 23. A lot of the time, David couldn't either. Just look at so many other Psalms. But at his centre, David knows that shalom peace I talked about, of really grasping God's love for him, despite his failings, despite his sin, despite his doubts. As shepherd, guide, provider, protector. And the challenge for us now, and also, will we reach the end of our lives able to speak as David does at the end of this psalm? Despite everything, despite illness, despite hardship, despite struggles, knowing that goodness and love have followed us all the days of our lives, and that we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. My parents had that sure hope, and despite all the questions I have, I know I can say to God, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. And I think that's a pretty good start. trusting in a good shepherd, a God who loves, who protects, who guides. The chorus of that Stuart Tannen song I sang to my father the last time I saw her, as I say, I think it may have been the last thing that she really heard. And she fell asleep as I sang. I clearly was not singing as loudly as I normally do. Was it? I will trust in you alone. I will trust in you alone. For your endless mercy follows me. Your goodness will lead me home. I'll play that, as I said, for you to hear properly in a minute. But just to finish, I'd just love us all to know that shalom piece about being led home, where we're going. The peace David expresses in Psalm 23, and which my father wrote about. I didn't actually say my father was a writer as well as a vicar and a preacher, and he wrote a few books. One of them was on 1 Corinthians, which was a lot about, this is the order of service that we used. A lot of it was about the suffering and the glory was the name of the book, and talking about the fact that life is not straightforward, that there is, as David put it, a valley of the shadow of death. A valley of the shadow of death, sorry. And in 2001, he wrote a paper for the C.S. Lewis Institute called Success and Failure, which I think ties in with a lot of what I've been saying today. It's just a short quote from it. Success, then, is to reach the end of our lives, having achieved what God put us here to become. That is, like his Son, Jesus Christ. Putting it like that underlines that we cannot achieve this by ourselves. We need the blessing and the grace of God. More than that, we need the daily presence of God, because shalom is the gift of God and can be received only in his presence. Jesus himself is our shalom. He preached shalom. He made shalom possible and available through the blood of his cross. And he himself is our shalom, our peace. As the Prince of Peace, he looks after our success and he looks after our failures. There's a glorious prayer of blessing given by God to Moses to pass on to Aaron as high priest, to pronounce and to go on pronouncing on the people of Israel. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Give you shalom. God's blessing, God's protection, God's presence, God's grace, God's peace. That all adds up to being fulfilled and being complete. That is success. Anything else, ultimately, is failure. I'll just finish before playing that song with that blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you